So when we talk about autism spectrum disorder, ASD, our minds often jump straight to, social stuff, communication challenges.
Right, and those are definitely key. Absolutely.
But today we're going to shine a light on something, well, equally profound, I think, but maybe often overlooked, the role of motor skill development.
Exactly. That's our mission for this deep dive, really, to kind of shift the focus a bit. We want to explore how these motor impairments are actually way more common and more impactful than people usually think for individuals with autism.
From childhood right through.
Right through, yeah, from childhood into adulthood. We'll dig into how these, physical abilities can influence social interactions, school success, just daily living stuff, and crucially, what the latest research is telling us about what actually helps, what interventions work.
Okay. And we've got a great stack of research and insights here from your therapy source to guide us. So let's start with just how widespread this connection really is, because it's kind of staggering.
It really is.
You look at the numbers, and they really do challenge, well, a lot of common ideas. There was this huge study, right, over 11,000 parent surveys,
Hmm.
and it found that, get this, 86.9% of kids with ASD are at risk for a motor impairment, often looking like developmental coordination disorder, DCD.
Almost 87%. That's huge.
It is, and when you hear a number like that, it sort of forces you to rethink things, like maybe motor challenges aren't just the side issue of autism, maybe they're more central, a core characteristic that we're often missing.
Absolutely. It shifts the whole conversation.
Hmm.
And what's really critical here is that these aren't just, little delays kids grow out of.
Right.
Research is pretty clear. Children with ASD often continue to show that risk for DCD right into their teenage years. So it's not a phase. It's a persistent challenge. It needs attention.
And yet, despite therapists, teachers, parents seeing these delays all the time,
Yeah, they notice it.
they notice it. But the kids often don't get that additional DCD diagnosis, which seems to lead to this, well, huge gap in support. One study found only about 31, maybe 32% were actually getting physical therapy, just under a third. It's a massive oversight, really, for something so common.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does, and it brings up that really important question. Could motor impairment actually be a core characteristic of autism, not just something that sometimes comes along with it?
Hmm.
And there's some pretty compelling research suggesting it might be. We see studies showing that lower motor scores are directly linked to more significant social impairment, and also linked to the overall severity of the autism diagnosis itself. It points to a much deeper connection, something integrated right into maybe how we should even define autism.
And this isn't just a childhood thing either, is it? You mentioned it persists. What about adulthood? Yeah, the impact definitely isn't limited to kids. If you look long-term, manual motor performance, so things like grip strength, how fast you can tap your fingers,
Okay.
that performance tends to get comparatively poorer from adolescence into adulthood for individuals with ASD, especially when you compare them to neurotypical peers. It's a lifelong trajectory, really.
So specific differences, what kinds of things are observed in adults?
Well, research points to things like greater side-to-side movement, like swaying when walking, more unsteadiness when they're just standing normally or trying to balance tandem or on one leg.
Right, balance challenges.
Yeah, balance. Also, reduced walking speed and cadence, sort of the rhythm of walking, more arrhythmicity or kind of unevenness during exercises like jumping jacks,
Okay.
and definitely impaired manual dexterity, like in those finger-tapping tasks. It's not just general clumsiness. It affects basic everyday movements all through life.
Wow. Okay, so it's clear these motor challenges are, well, widespread and they stick around. But how do these physical things actually ripple out? How do they affect other parts of life, like, say, social skills? Seems like a leap.
It might seem like a leap, but there's this really interesting, small but significant connection. Deficits in gross motor skills, like running and jumping, have been linked to deficits in social skills.
Really? How does that work?
Well, think about it. It's not just about what your body can do physically, but how that ability, or lack thereof, shapes your chances to interact with others.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. Research suggests that object control skills, think ball skills, catching, throwing away,
Right.
and also manual dexterity, like fine motor stuff, those seem most closely tied to social skills. One study found that in young boys with autism, their stability, their balance, and how well they could manipulate objects actually predicted their overall social functioning later.
Ah, okay. So if you struggle to, I don't know, catch a ball on the playground.
Exactly. Participating in those casual games becomes really, really hard.
Mhm.
And those games are where kids learn so much social stuff, taking turns, reading cues, cooperating.
Yeah, those playground dynamics are huge. And if you have motor challenges or social challenges or even sensory processing issues, it just makes it so much harder to join in. It's not just running around, is it? It's about belonging, learning those unwritten rules.
Precisely.
Hmm.
And there's even a neurological piece to this. It's quite fascinating.
Ah.
Yeah, studies using brain imaging show that when children with ASD watch someone else perform an action, they tend to have less activation in a specific brain area. It's called the inferior frontal gyrus pars opercularis.
Okay. Bit of a mouthful. What does that part do?
It's thought to be important for something called precognitive embodied simulation, which is basically our brain's way of mentally simulating or kind of trying on other people's actions to understand their intention.
Like mirroring them in your head. Sort of, yeah. So less activation there might suggest an underlying difference in the brain's motor circuits themselves. And that could relate to some of the social characteristics we see in ASD. It's not just about moving your own body, but how the brain processes movement information, generally yours and others.
Wow. That's a deep connection. So the brain's handling of movement itself influences the social world. Okay, what about other areas like schoolwork, daily functioning?
Absolutely linked there too. And quite strongly. There was this really neat study involving a structured motor intervention program, an MIP, for preschoolers with autism.
Okay.
Not only did their movement skills get significantly better, which you'd expect,
Sure.
but they also made significant progress in understanding academic concepts, colors, numbers, shapes, size comparisons, things like that.
Just from a motor program.
Yeah. It really shows how movement-based learning can, well, keep kids engaged.
Yeah.
And maybe even improve memory for academic stuff. Movement helps anchor learning.
And that connection holds up. Motor skills and academic success. It seems to, yes. The link is pretty clear. And it's not just about preschool either. The impact stretches way out. Think about manual motor performance, again, specifically grip strength.
Okay, grip strength.
That's been shown to be related to adaptive daily living skills.
Yeah.
Dressing, feeding oneself, hygiene.
Right, essential independence skills.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And get this, grip strength in childhood or adolescence can even predict those daily living skills 8 years down the line.
8 years. That's huge for thinking about long-term independence, quality of life.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, think about gross motor skills. They're needed all day long, aren't they? Getting out of bed, walking around school, playing, even just getting ready for bed at night.
Right.
They're fundamental to pretty much everything we do.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier connections to behavior. How does physical activity play into things like repetitive behaviors or maybe challenging behaviors?
Yeah, there's good evidence there, too. Engaging in moderate to vigorous physical activity, MVPA, getting the heart rate up. That's been shown to actually decrease stereotypy, those repetitive movements, and also problem behaviors in kids with autism. And at the same time, it can increase their engagement in academic tasks.
So physical activity helps regulate things.
It seems to. And that structured motor program we talked about, the MIP,
Yeah.
it also led to a decrease in repetitive behaviors and, interestingly, improved social interaction as well. The benefits really do seem to spread out.
Okay, this is all pointing towards motor skills being incredibly important, far more than maybe we typically acknowledge. So given how pervasive these challenges are, what does the research say we should do about it? What are the pathways to progress?
Well, the message from researchers is becoming really strong, really clear. They strongly recommend that a diagnosis of ASD should basically trigger motor screening.
Automatically.
That's the recommendation, yeah. Followed by proper evaluations and, where needed, interventions by physical and occupational therapists. The conclusion many are reaching is that motor evaluations and interventions really ought to be the standard of care for all children with ASD. And some even argue that dyspraxia, motor coordination difficulties, should be formally recognized as an important part of the definition of ASD itself. It's a call for a pretty fundamental shift in how we approach diagnosis and support.
Okay, so if we're going to screen and evaluate, how do we actually do that reliably? How are motor skills assessed?
So the fundamental gross motor skills usually fall into 3 buckets. Stability, like balance, locomotor, like running, jumping, and object control, throwing, catching.
Right.
And for children with autism, the assessments that are generally considered the most reliable and appropriate psychometrically speaking, are the Brunings-Osersky test of motor proficiency, the second edition usually called the BOT2,
BOT2, got it.
and a test of gross motor development, second edition, the TGMD2. These are standardized tests. They give objective measures of coordination, balance, strength, how kids use their bodies.
And for adults, is it different?
For adults, things like 3D video analysis can be really helpful. It allows for a more detailed, nuanced look at movement patterns.
Okay, so we have ways to assess. What about the interventions themselves? What does the research say actually works best?
Well, number one is probably early and consistent intervention, especially in those preschool years. Getting in early seems crucial. Those early motor experiences really can set the stage for development in lots of areas.
Okay, early and consistent. Makes sense. Now, you mentioned something earlier that really caught my attention about practice. Constant versus variable.
Ah, yes, that
Oh.
study was fascinating and really important for practical application. It found that constant practice, so repeating the same skill in the same way, led to significant improvement for the kids with ASD in the study.
Okay, that makes sense. Practice makes perfect.
Right. But here's the kicker, variable practice, where they changed the conditions or the task frequently.
Oh.
That did not lead to improvement. In fact, for the kids with ASD, their scores actually decreased with variable practice.
Decreased. That's counterintuitive, isn't it? Usually variety is good for learning.
It often is for neurotypical development, yeah. But the thinking here, the why, is that variable practice might just be too demanding cognitively for many children with ASD.
How so?
Think about the extra processing needed. If you're learning to throw a ball into a bucket, constant practice is just throwing that ball same distance, same bucket over and over. Variable practice might be changing the distance, changing the ball size, changing the target. Each change requires recalculating, adapting.
Right. Lots of mental overhead.
Exactly. It can be overwhelming if the basic skill isn't solid yet. So the takeaway for therapists, for parents, is pretty clear. Start with structured, repetitive, constant practice. Build that core skill. Build confidence.
Then introduce variety later.
Then, gradually, carefully, start adding variation. And while you're doing that constant practice, use minimal verbal instructions. Show, don't just tell. Keep the sessions relatively short, but do them regularly. And really resist the urge to keep changing the setup or the instructions, especially at the beginning. Predictability is key.
That is incredibly practical advice. Build the foundation first with repetition.
Okay, what about other approaches? Structured programs, playgrounds.
Yeah, there's structured motor programs we mentioned, the ones that combine basic movement with maybe some pre-academic or social skill practice. Those show really good results.
Okay.
And on playgrounds, which can be tough environments. Simple things can help. Teacher-led activities offering clear choices of activities using portable, engaging materials like bubbles, scarves, beanbags that can really boost participation and physical activity for kids with ASD.
So making it more structured and inviting.
Yes, and also actively supporting the social side of things, helping kids learn how to join in, maybe practicing social scenarios that kind of support across the school day, not just on the playground, has been shown to increase their engagement during playtime, too. It builds their confidence to try.
Scaffolding both the motor and the social. Makes sense. Any more creative interventions showing promise? Definitely. Things like yoga designed specifically for autism are emerging as really promising tools. They can help enhance not just motor skills, but also imitation skills, body awareness. It's finding engaging, holistic ways to work on movement.
Okay, so let's bring this home for, parents, caregivers, educators listening. What does this all mean day to day? What are some simple, actionable things people can do?
You really don't need a fancy setup. It's more about consistency and integration. Try setting aside just short bursts of time for movement each day, maybe 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
Use simple structured games that naturally involve things like turn-taking or cooperation. Rolling a ball back and forth is a classic for a reason.
Yeah.
And try combining movement with other learning. Jumping to different colored spots on the floor. Tossing a beanbag while you practice counting. Catching a ball when it's your turn to answer a question. Just weave it into what you're already doing. Make movement a natural part of the learning landscape.
That sounds manageable. Integrating it naturally.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive today. We've really covered a lot of ground on this crucial but maybe underappreciated aspect of autism. I think the core message that's coming through loud and clear is that motor skill development isn't some separate, isolated issue. It's deeply woven into the fabric of social, cognitive, and behavioral development for individuals with autism right across their lives.
Absolutely. That interconnectedness is key. And understanding it really should change how we approach both understanding autism and supporting individuals who have it.
So the final thought for you, our listener.
Yeah.
Given everything we've discussed, this profound and interconnected role of motor skills, how might our understanding, our support systems, our whole approach to autism evolve if motor screening and intervention became a universal standard right from the very beginning, from that first diagnosis?
It's definitely something worth reflecting on. And remember, you can find all the references for the studies and insights we discussed today over at your therapy source.